right, so today I am going to be doing a illustration out of a photograph on Photoshop using one of our photos. So the whole idea of this is to take a photograph that we've taken and then make it an illustrative form over the course of a few hours by tracing the image and then recoloring and drawing it in to give it an illustrated look. So the first thing I'm going to do is show you how to prime your photograph for this process if you want to do the same thing. The first thing you're going to want to do is go up to File, New, and you're going to want a poster sized illustration if you want to have something that's quality enough to use in the future. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this poster, which will make a very large file size. It's 18 by 24 inches, which is excellent. And orientation wise, I've already got the orientation I want. I know I'm going to end up having to either crop my image or pull it in a little bit, so we'll see what I end up doing with that in just a second. So now that I have this, I just need to go over to the image I've picked out, which is this one of me in the forest between some trees. And I'm going to need to Control A to grab all of that, Control C to copy, and then move that over to my new poster-sized file and say Control V. Since we're doing a complete re-illustration of this image, it is totally fine for us to scale this image up, which we can't do with photographs. So the nice thing is, the file size you're going to be getting out of this is a lot larger than your actual photograph. And you can use amazingly small photographs to do this. So if you happen to have like a really small photo that a family member or a friend gave you and they want an illustration made from it, it is really easy to hype the quality on the file they gave you and give them something really wonderful in return. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to scale my image up and find out what I want my composition to be. So I'm going to go Control T to transform this image and then just drag this till I get it where I want it in size. And the thing about this image is I don't want to zoom in too far because I actually really like the height of this image. So I'm going to have to decide what I want to do with the edges of this image, which means I'm probably going to fudge a lot of details along one side or both. So let's see. I kind of want it centered maybe a little bit more this direction, like so. So after that, I'm going to go ahead and say Enter, and that sets my transformation. So as you can see, we now have two layers. We have our background layer and we have layer number 1, which is our photograph. What I'm going to do now is I am going to go ahead and add a couple extra layers to this to start the drawing process. So I'm just going down here to create new layer on our layer menu. I'm going to say 1, 2, 3. That's how I usually start it. I mean, you can honestly just start with one extra layer at a time and place them as you go, but I like to start with 3. It just gives me a good base to start with. And I'm going to use this first layer right here as my line layer. So with these drawings, there's a couple of things to consider with lines. We can pick a color. Usually you want a darker color to be your first line, unless you're dealing with an incredibly light colored image, which at that point you might make a different decision. I usually range somewhere between a dark brown to black for my lines, and it's surprising how light the dark brown will actually end up looking when you do the finished image. I'm going to go ahead and actually do black today though. I think this image is going to work better with, well, changing my mind there. Not sure. How about a darker brown? Go for something like that. Not quite black. But yeah, that might give it a little something different. We'll see how it ends up. I'm going to click OK on that. So I've picked my color out. I've got my brush selected here. We're just using the regular brush tool. I've actually collected quite a collection of brushes on my computer already. If you go to the Adobe brush pages, if you have Cloud, I think they have a large selection of brushes you can get there for free. There are also tons of websites out there that have collected free brushes that artists have made over time. And you can get quite a variety of brushes out there. The brushes I'm going to be using today are the normal hardness round brushes from Photoshop that come on all Photoshop. And also some, I'm going to be using, I think maybe a few vegetation brushes, which are more specific. And actually in the future, I'm thinking about doing a video where I actually show you guys how to make those brushes, which is pretty fun. And then also watercolor brushes that came from the Adobe Creative Cloud collection. So we are going to use those, and I'm going to start with a hard brush. So just your general hard round brush for the line drawing. I have done transparent lines, but personally I have found that for at least my drawing style, I like using solid opacity lines more. So it just ends up being more useful in the end for me. So hard round, I'm going to go ahead and use, let's see, I've got to kind of zoom in here and see how big I'm going to get my first lines going. I'm going to go ahead and hide my layers for now. As you can see, I'm still on that upper new layer that I made. So I'm going to want something a little smaller than this. I'm not trying to go too chunky on my image here. So I'll probably right around 30 something will be good to start with. And if I need it bigger, I will go ahead and do that. So I'm going to start drawing the lines. And with that process, I should probably tell you about the hardware I am actually using for this. I have my normal computer set up to the side of me over here, and on that I'm actually doing a lot of the general clicking I have to do between different kinds of things like cropping and stuff like that. But then I also am working right here on a Wacom Cintiq large-sized tablet, and I've got my stylus right here, and I should probably tell you guys a little bit about the brush settings that you can use with a stylus that you can't use quite as well with a normal mouse. So I'm going to go ahead and open up the brush settings panel right here. The only thing I currently have selected with my brush is Shape Dynamics, and what Shape Dynamics does is, I can quickly show you here on the side. It allows me to create lines that are thicker in the center depending on how hard I press, and it tapers off at the edges depending on how much pressure I'm putting. Super, super handy. It's like an absolute must personally for me when I'm doing this kind of work. So I'm going to undo those probably with my history here. All right, there is one other thing I could use occasionally during this process, and that is smoothing. So otherwise, certain brushes will set themselves up with a lot of these other things, and I follow their lead. Smoothing I very occasionally use if I'm having a really difficult time with certain long, smooth lines. Oftentimes I don't end up using this for these, but very occasionally I will. And what smoothing does is, no matter how fast and rapid I'm moving, as you can see here, the lines are relatively smooth and kind of takes the shake out of the process, which can be handy. So I'm going to go ahead and actually start drawing in now. So I usually get pretty close when I do this. All right, so Again, I am on the right layer, which is my upper layer. I have made some big mistakes in the past where I'm actually still on my photo layer. Big mistake, because if you're on your photo layer, then you can't do layering very well in the future. Make sure you're on the right layer, especially when you're doing your lines. And I'm gonna just go ahead and start getting the impressions of the lines of this image. This is gonna take a while, so if some of you are thinking about coming and checking out this process, you might end up leaving at some point, coming back later to see some progress done. I will be here probably for the next several hours doing this to get the image to completion. So I'm going to start with the hair. Just get the general lines. I'm actually thinking that's a little thick for my taste. I'm actually going to do that one more time. Sometimes it takes a little bit of touch and go to figure it out in the very beginning. And I don't want to be too... Do I have smoothing on still? I do. I don't like that. Let's take that off. One more time. So I'm trying to get the more rapid textures, especially since this is curly hair. I want to have the more natural textures of the hair. And you've probably seen Sean is next to me. Hello, Sean.
Hello, goodbye.
He is being my tech support tonight. All right, so I'm just going to kind of follow these hairs up and just start trying to find the textures of it. Sometimes you can also change the textures if you're not particularly happy with something, but I do enjoy this image, so I'm going to try and keep a lot of its qualities. It's going to be interesting talking at a camera for like 2 to 3 hours tonight. Not something I'm used to. And this is always a toughie part for me, especially when there's hair running across a face, like around here. Trying to figure out how much of the face I want to keep and where I want the hair to continue to cross the face, because unlike a normal face with hair coming across it, we can see a lot of the details here in the photograph still between all these hairs. But when we're doing the illustrative version, the lines are a lot thicker. You have to determine where color goes, so you really have to be a lot more picky about how much of the hair sticks around. Sometimes another thing I will do is I will even go in, take my photo layer and lighten it up a bit just for the drawing process so that I can get a better idea of where all the shadows are in the hair. Sometimes the deeper shadows make it a lot harder to do these darker lines. So I'll do that for a bit. Except that is on the wrong layer. Oh, look at how that happens, guys. Got to be careful or you'll end up drawing all over your photo layer. This is also another fun practice, sitting on a yoga ball while trying to draw. It's comfortable though. Very messy hair. I had super messy hair this day. It's kind of a task to draw. Get the right flavor. Let's see. The nice thing about this drawing style is it does not have a very hard entry level. As you can see, I am tracing most of this image, so you really don't need to be an expert of anatomy or anything like that. It's really just kind of taking the impressions of a photograph and turning that into something else. And I love that I already have all the tools to do this because of the other kinds of work I do. I also really personally prefer digital media myself. I don't know what it is, I just don't like touching paper. Now I know there's going to be a lot of people out there who are like, that is not me, and I totally understand. All right, before I get too much further, I'm actually going to go ahead and draw my impressions of the face here because I am worried that the hair is going to overtake it. Really hard to see too. This is a kind of a fun thing about this process, is that sometimes the faces are almost unseeable. Like they're just so blurry or something's going on, you know, in these photographs. It makes it hard to see. So you kind of have to do your best to figure out what's going on there. It's not too different actually from some of the photo work I also have to do. Sometimes we have to do kind of extreme cleanup on faces, and you have to just kind of decide what all is happening with that face. If it's really blurred out. That's looking good to me. It doesn't look too far off from my profile. I think I'm doing an okay job. Let's see. Sometimes it's a hard decision for me on how much lineage to do on lips because they don't look like solid lines to me most of the time so much as like a color on the face. So I'm not going to do a ton, I think, with these ones. Maybe just, I'll experiment a little bit and probably backtrack a bit as I go. If I do any lines, I want it to be pretty slender, very thin. There we go. I'm okay with that. No, not that one though. It's an experiment most of the time. At least for me. All right, now that we've got that figured out, we can get some of these hair strands coming from behind my face without disturbing the face too much. If you guys have any questions about the equipment I am using or techniques I'm doing, feel free to ask. I actually finally have a screen up here so I can see any comments coming in now. Also, what is your favorite medium of art? What do you like to do? Okay, I am getting happy with that. Let's see, I don't want too bright a lines back there. Okay, seems like that's working out. Got a little bit more hair at the top here to finish. It's kind of going separate directions too. Oh, no, that was sloppy. Let me redo that. I know some of you are probably like, just use your history bar, but sometimes that works faster. All right. I think I have gotten the hair pretty well covered there. And it's going to be interesting in this image. I tried to pick something that would be interesting. The hard part about interesting is that it's there's a lot going on. So once we're done with the front model here, me, we've got a whole lot to do in the background of this image as well. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and start doing some of the rest of the body shapes. It's going to be fun to play around with the colors in this image when I get it a little further along. In the original photo edit of this image, the sides of this image between the edges of these two trees are normal for a screen, and then the interior of these two trees with the model me is bright yellow, so it kind of looks like a doorway to another place. I'm not sure if I'm going to go that route during this or something else. I'll have to figure that out. It's funny, surprisingly for me, that the skill set of doing this is not very different from doing photo edits, because I have to do so much painting on some photo edits to get the colors to really pop. So it really is a coloring job on a lot of photo edits. This is not very different. And color manipulation, which I will do a lot of in the ends of these edits. You'll see I still use my my Photoshop skills to play with my colors despite the job I have done beforehand. I'm also going to do a shadow layer on this as well once I get these lines done. That's something that I've started doing more recently, actually, to just really capture the crinkling and motions of fabric and shadows on skin. funny story about this day modeling. I don't know if you guys can notice, but there is a slight bulge around my waist right here. It's kind of sticking through the fabric. Somehow I forgot to take my tank top completely off, and that showed up. I was surprised it didn't look worse in the ending photos. That was an interesting cleanup to have to do. And by far the worst wardrobe mistake I've ever had as a model, for sure. So unfortunately, this is where it gets a tiny bit boring because I just really have to go through and take care of all of these fine lines. Another thing you can do is you can just do the line layer when doing one of these, and then take the actual colors of the image and mess them up using filters to the point where they look like watercolor or pasteled in colors. And that alone can make for a very illustrative looking image. This dress, I'll tell you what, gets around on our photo shoots. We have used this white dress so many times on photo shoots. It's just a fun one. It's very, very easy to use and have look good in a location. It's also kind of one of the dresses where, like, you want to mess a dress up, this is the dress to mess up. Like, we've thrown this thing through the wash so many times. Doesn't matter what mud it's been in, or sand, or ocean. It doesn't really seem to care much. I actually see a little bit of mud on my leg there. That is one good thing about polyester fabric. This dress is very easy to wash. Oops. I'm gonna go ahead and get some of these lines now. And then in the shadows, I will do a little more in this area. I have a feeling this image is actually going to end up looking a bit moodier than it currently does. Moss is really interesting to have to draw, and I do really enjoy some of the brush textures that people have made to help make moss a little easier. Oops, I'll take it, whatever. Lots of mud on the back of this dress. I believe this was after a long shoot day with this dress. Or actually, maybe it was about midday because I think I put it back on later and we went and shot on the coast with my friend Lauren Zurchin Studios. And we had a candelabra, and that was a lot of fun at dusk in the ocean. I'm gonna go ahead and zoom out now. I can work on the shoes and legs. I'm gonna go ahead and zoom in on that area. Okay, we've got the shoes taken care of now, which I think means that the entire model is now lined, except for that little tiny bit of dress right back there. All right. Oh, there are a few other little details I could do on this. In here, there's a few sewing line details. And a few wrinkles, which I think I will accentuate a little bit. Shoot. And then we also have these little lace details along the separate portions of the dress. And a little bit of a line that goes in between them for the stitching. And a very faint line on the bodice right there. And then we have this, more of that lace trail. I think I will do a few lace folds down here because this lace was ruffled. Kind of fudging some lines through this area just to show the laces movement. There you go. Okay, now I think it is actually time to back out and start drawing some of the larger surrounding details in, like the trees. I'm going to go a little bit bigger on the brush, get some thicker lines for these. not worrying too much about the moss details right now because I will put those back in. Oh yes, and since I have some white border on each side and I'm actually extending my image outwards, I need to kind of bring the details with that. So all the way across there. Drawing in a few little on the log details. Not going too wild yet though. I'm not going to do all of the details on this first layer. I'm going to actually move some of the further back in the background elements to a whole new layer. But I am going to get some of these branches that are kind of hanging over the scene on this first layer. Fudge a few branches here on the sides and hope I do a good job. There are a few elements on the ground in the front of this log I'm standing on that I'm going to go ahead and enhance by drawing. So I'm going to add a little bit of a roughage shape in front of these trees. Okay, So now that I've gotten all of the elements I have drawn, I'm going to go ahead and make a new line layer. So I'm just going to go ahead and click on layer number 3 that I started earlier, which is a fresh layer. And I'm going to start drawing a lot of the background lines. I'm going to kind of go a little bit lighter on these two. Probably tone it down a bit so that they're not as strong. All right, and I have to kind of falsify a few lines off this edge. Extend this log outwards in that direction. And I'm going to go ahead and take this one and continue it in its trajectory. And I'm not doing all of the lines, I'm kind of picking out the ones that I think are the most standout in the background. Okay, I'm starting to feel pretty good about the lines on this side of the image, so I'm going to go ahead and work on the other side a little bit more now to these two. As you can see little bits of trees coming through the background here. I'm kind of trying to go pretty light on these lines. Again, we don't want the background elements to be so strong that they take away from the foreground elements. At least that's what I'm trying to do. And again, if you guys have any questions about what I'm working on, feel free to chat with me. I can see my chat board right now, so I can answer questions as I'm doing this. This is one of the hardest things about the Pacific Northwest forest. It is just so lush and so covered in branches that to really get that across, you do have to take a bit of time and work on bringing a lot of that out. So usually I would say anytime I do an image that is a forested background like this, it probably ends up taking me an extra hour alone just to deal with the background. But they are fun. I really enjoy how these ones come out. And for anyone who's just popping in, I am doing a drawing over a photograph and turning it into a more illustrative piece of art. And right now I am working on the line textures of the image. After that I will go into the shadows, and then I will start to do coloring before going and doing the final work of extra textures throughout the image, including things like the moss on the trees. I still have these massive stumps back here. I don't want to get rid of those, so I've got to give them some decent texture with the lines, so they do stand out a little bit. And we'll also do a little bit of extra work on that later using the shadow layers. Sometimes I also like to hide my layer quickly so I can kind of see how all the lines are forming in the background. Not bad, getting there. We don't worry too much about the foliage textures yet. That's stuff that's probably going to mostly get added back in later. And I will also go between the layers to do the foliage texturing so that it kind of three-dimensionally comes through the image over the lines. That is the nice thing about Photoshop. I can go back and work between any of the layers of painting I've done at any time I want. Looks like there's like a downed shrubbery or tree back here, so I'm going to just try and grab those branches. I'm going to check my layer again. I'm going to go ahead and draw some of these lines up a little bit higher, because I might need them later on, and I can always put foliage over them regardless. There we go. All right, so this is what our base image is currently looking like with the lines. Now I'm going to go ahead and do a layer for each of the sections we've done. We've got the foreground elements, we've got the background elements, and on these layers I'm going to do shadow work. So I will show you that in just a second. I just need to get some new layers made. Actually, really just one layer right now for this section. So I'm going to move that layer underneath, and now I've got one fresh layer under each of the line sections I now have. Now I do have to be careful during this process. I have to make sure that I'm putting the lines in the proper place. So if I remove this, these are the only elements we have for the foreground. So we've got the ground in the front, we've got the tree, the two trees coming up, and we've got a few branches at the top. I just have to make sure that my shadow work only encompasses those for the foreground elements layer. And then for the background element, I will switch to this layer underneath the other line section. And that way we have two different sections of the image that I can use for a more dimensional painting a little bit later on. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and start with only the foreground elements, which we just checked on. And I'm going to go ahead and turn my photo back on so I can get a good idea of what the shadows look like. And now I'm actually going to go ahead and select a new brush, and I'm going to go into some of my specialty brushes that I have, which is a watercolor set I got off of the Adobe Creative Cloud brush site. And I'm going to go scroll down through this. I have kind of a couple of favorite brushes through this. And my favorite for drawing and painting is the Clean Edge brush. But once I blow this up and show you, you'll notice that it's not completely opaque, which is fantastic for shadows. And I'm also going to go ahead and down the opacity a bit for the shadows, probably closer to 50%, so that I can layer them in a little bit at a time. Again, I'm going to double check that I'm on the right layer. So if I turn this off, yep, I should be doing my shadow work inside the foreground elements. I'm gonna go ahead and keep using the super dark brown color I've been using for the line work so that the shadows and line work match up. All right, now I just go ahead and start drawing in my shadows. Again, this might be a good case to go to this. I might even reduce the opacity just a slight bit more on my lower image, Don't want to go too far though. I might actually have to just go back up. Okay, I'll work with this. I'll do it. And then what I start doing is I start just painting in wherever I think shadows belong, like on this tree right here. It is very shadowy, especially in the center facing the camera. So I'm just doing one layer of shadow right now. I'm going to go ahead and layer a little bit more brush strokes over this in just a second, like now. Oh gosh, I'm making a mistake, guys, and I've warned about this before. I am on my photo layer. This happens so often to me. Be careful, make sure that you actually go back up to the right layer before starting. I will go ahead and backtrack that up and then just double check. Oh, see, it put me back on the photo layer. Going up to layer 5, that's where we want to be. I had a feeling because I was noticing that the paintbrush wasn't as dark as it should be. So I'm not doing all of the tree because I do kind of want to have a little teensy bit of rimming on the outer edges where there'll be a bit more light. Down here I do want it to get pretty dark. I'll just do a tad bit more on this side. And this one's a bit lighter. Also kind of has points of shadow that are a bit more strong. And so I'm just going to go ahead and do a little bit down the center shadow on this one. Bit of a focus on certain points. And then on my second pass, I'm just going to focus on a few very specific areas. Like underneath this branch right here, there was a little bit more shadow. Along this little branch right here, there's a bit of shadow. And then there's just a little pockets where the shadows get a bit deeper at certain points on this tree. There we go. So if I just go ahead and erase my background layer, you can actually start to see those shadow layers starting to build up. I'm just going to go ahead and do one more smooth pass on this all the way up and down it. And check on that. That's looking good to me. So now that I've gotten those true trees done, I can also do this stump down here at the very base. I have no idea if this is audible in the camera right now, but I can hear our neighbors all drumming and banging on pots and pans outside right now. I have to make sure I extend these shadows off the edges just like I did with the lines. Very easy to forget. Oop. Went a little too far off the edge there and hit my dress. Don't quite want that yet. Be a little more careful this time. Remember, I still have to go off the edge on these sides. It's so easy to forget when doing an image that doesn't quite extend to the edges. Photoshop is swiftly trying to catch up with my painting here. I'm just going to do a bit more shadow layering, especially along this dark lower edge where the trunk hits. It's the darkest point on the tree. May even draw in some darker colors later on or shadow work separate from this at some point. Go ahead and just do a little bit of kind of mottled groundwork here too, which will also get worked on once we add some other kinds of brushwork in here as well with color. But the ground is not a very bright place in this image in the foreground. All right, so there are a few shadows higher up on the tree as well. I'm making a mistake again. Remember I was saying only the foreground elements, which I was almost done with. I should not be painting that. I need to backtrack a bit. Okay, there we go. We'll leave it there because I actually want to wait and do this with my background elements. Otherwise, the shadow layering that I'm doing right now with the plant foliage I want to put in later will not work. So I actually need to focus on the model now and a couple of these branches up here in the tree line. I know this one's in the foreground. I'm just going to double check I'm on the right layer. I am. That is good. Alright, so I'm going to do a little bit of shadow work in my hair. Certain parts of the hair are definitely darker. I'm actually going to get a lot closer in as well. And this way I can do a much better job of making sure that I am controlling those shadows. The face is actually very shadowy in general in this image compared to other portions. So I'm going to go ahead and just do one layer of shadow wash over it and then just focus a little bit on the eye, just right above. And then there's just a little bit to do out here on the body. Though in comparison to other portions of the image, the shadows on the body are a lot lighter. In fact, I'm actually going to go ahead and undo that and then go ahead and bring the opacity down even further so that the work I do on the body with shadows is much lighter. It doesn't have to be perfect. Again, we're trying to make this look illustrative, so we don't want everything to be too shiny. I mean, what's the point? At that point, you might as well have a photo. I'm going to go ahead and just kind of checker a little bit of shadow into the ruffled section of the dress because this will go ahead and help give the illusion of ruffles. Especially down here, I need to make them particularly dark. So I'm just going to go ahead and fill them all in a bit. And then I will checker in some color as well in this area. So I'm just drawing the shadows down the dress. just add a lot more texture with the shadows into this lower portion of the dress. All right, so let's see, I think I've gotten most of it. I just have a little bit to do on this arm before moving on to the next step. Just double check down the body. Give it a little shadow right there. Intensify a little bit of this. I'll add a little extra right here. Okay, so now if I go ahead and remove the background, this is what we're looking at shadow-wise. So not bad for a start. Now I mostly just have to focus on doing a little bit of shadow work on the background, and then we can move on to coloring. All right, so now we have to move to layer 2, which is underneath layer 3, which is our background element layer. So we want to keep these connected with each other so that we can actually do some dimensional layering later on. All right, I will go ahead and maybe expand my brush size a bit. So we're going to be working on background elements. And then just start layering in shadow where it makes sense. And I'm going to expand the opacity actually quite a bit, maybe even up to 60. This is still a only slightly opaque watercolor brush. So go ahead and add a little bit of layering there. Got a lot of shadow going on right here. And it's okay if a little bit of the foliage gets covered up right now, because we're going to be pulling that back through on different layers after this. And I'm being a little more robust with the brush here because I'm not worried so much about the fine details on the background. It's still going to be very much the background, and it's okay for it to be a little bit more murky in definition. I'll get back to this area, which I was working on beforehand before I realized I needed to stop and do it on this layer. This definitely moves a lot faster than the line layer, especially when you get to the the background elements, because you can just really just slop it on there. Even fill in a little bit down there because that's a very shadowed area. I'll come over here, do the same. Oops, can't go over the foot quite yet. I suppose I could. Technically, there will be layers of color in front of this, but just want to still be a little bit careful. Okay. Get some more shadow on the undersides of this log. I'm going to go ahead and just take a peek at how things are looking back there. Not bad, it's coming together. This tree right here could use a little bit of shadow definition on it. And I think I'm just going to add a little bit of textures to the forest floor in here. Just give it a little something to start with before I have to end up doing a lot more texturing with color. Go ahead and assume that there's actually a very large log crossing this area right here, because we have trees growing on it. And again, if anyone has any questions while I'm doing this, I am checking on my chat occasionally. Okay, do one more check on this. That is feeling a lot more lively to me. That is something I think I can start to work into the next section. All right, so now that I've got two sections here, we've got our overlayer, which is the foreground lines and the foreground shadows. And we've got our background layer, which is the background line and shadows. I think we can move on to the next step. So I'm going to go ahead and create a couple more layers, and I'm going to line these up so that they are behind both of our shadow and line layers for the foreground and background. So there's our foreground elements, and then there's one layer behind them that's new. And then there's our background elements, and there's one layer behind those that is new. So now that I have those set up, I'm going to go ahead and start coloring the foreground, which means I have to pick some colors. So I'm going to go for a skin tone. Let's see, something kind of pale. That'll work. And I am actually going to continue to use the brush I've been using for a while now, which is the Watercolor Clean Edge brush from the Adobe Creative Cloud collections. And I'm going to go ahead and zoom in so I can do some detail work while I do this. I think it's pretty common for me to do the skin toning first before I do other things. I think just because the hair elements I can always re-layer over if the skin gets a bit messy, like it is right now. Oh, I am also at opacity 63 right now. I'm going to move that all the way back up to 100. And I'm going to double check that I'm on the right layer, and I am. Good. The most common problem I have while I'm doing these is forgetting which layer I'm on. and then working on the wrong layer for a while and having to backtrack all that work. Hopefully with time I will get better at that. I will also add some extra colors to the skin when we get to the next steps. I'm actually going to just layer this back in. Looks like I've picked a paler color than the actual skin tone, but that's okay. I think that will work. We'll kind of go for a washed out look. So I'm not being extremely tidy yet. I will get there though, as more of this lines up or it gets finished. I'm glad you're enjoying watching. Thank you for watching. It's very soothing for me to do this every few nights. It's kind of become my, I mean, I do a lot of different forms of art, but this has kind of become my, how do you call it? My hobbyist art, the thing I do for my own relaxation. It's also a lot of fun to do. If you ever get the opportunity to play around with this, it's really enjoyable. And I like the lack of stress involved with it because you do not have to be extremely trained in anatomy and drawing technique to accomplish this. I'm going to have to wash out the colors on this image a lot to make it work with this skin tone, but it'll be interesting. It'll be a fun new direction. Might also change the color of the shoes. The one thing I do have to be careful about with the pen while I'm working is that I don't go outside of the lines that I've drawn for the foreground elements, because I will have to eventually do the next layer, and anything that shows on this layer will show up on that layer as well if it's outside the lines. Hello, Evan. Thanks for watching. Glad to be hanging with you guys tonight. Okay, so going with our washed out theme, I need to pick a hair color. I might end up picking something a lot lighter than I normally would, just because of the current theme we have going here. Let's take a look, see how it ends up. There's a lot of shadow on the hair already, so this won't change things a ton. I'm actually going to zoom way in so I can be very precise now. Make sure I'm not going outside the lines too much. Oops, just a little bit there. It's always interesting when I end up adding background colors into this. I find the spots that I missed before, and then I go back through and I touch all those up. So I'm thinking I might do this once a week during these drawing sessions I do. Stream it online for people to watch. Not sure if I'm going to go for a particular day on that. I will decide that soon. But it will most likely be evenings every single time. Actually, I can pretty much guarantee that. Probably starting around 6 p.m. Surprising how long it can take it to very thoroughly and properly color in the hair. getting pretty close to having the hair finished on this side. I'll actually go ahead and expand the brush side for just a moment. Get a bunch of this in and go back down in size to get those details. Okay, I think I've got the hair pretty well figured out, at least for now. I'm going to go ahead and pick a lip color. Might go a little bit more shocking with this one. It might be a darker color, something that will stand out a little bit. I'll get a really small brush size so I can get that in without too much trouble. Going for a different color theme than this image originally was. I'm going to go ahead and also blush the cheeks up just a little bit, add a bit of color in there so that it's not too deathly looking. I'm going to reduce the opacity on this pass just so that it's not too bright. That adds a bit more color to the face. And I might also brush a bit of that across the body as well in certain places. A bit on the shoulder. And the hands. Hands always get really cold outside and they often gather a bit of a redder tint than the rest of the body. Feet can also do this as well. make this brush a lot bigger now and just streak a little bit. There we go. Okay, so now I'm going to move on to the dress. And I'm really actually liking the color tones that are already coming through on the dress. So I think I'm going to go ahead and aim for something actually kind of gray. Not so bright. Maybe with a tiny bit of tint to it. I'm trying to think of what I want that tint to be. Could be greenish. I actually think I'm liking this warmer gray tint a little bit better. And then I'm going to go ahead and zoom in again and start working on the strap sections. That's actually a little too far. There we go. And just fill these in with our newfound color. And I need my opacity all the way back up, and I'm actually going to make the brush a lot smaller so that I can really get the details without removing the hair work I did. Perhaps it would have been a good idea to actually do the hair after this step, but that's okay. Thin a couple of those hairlines just a little bit. And then brush in more color. Now I can get the brush a bit bigger for a bit. Try and fill as much of this in as possible. And then go back in with a small brush again. And fill in some of those harder to reach areas. Alright, so now I'm getting further down the dress. I can definitely go back to a bigger brush for a little while. So I'm just going to go ahead and go along these edges with my brush so that I can more quickly fill in some of the interior with this color. Thinking I might change the color of the shoes. I'm not sure yet though. Either I'll keep them that closer to that brown color that they currently are, or I might make them gray to match the dress. But I'm kind of torn. Not sure which direction I'm going to take that yet. I'm going to go ahead and make a much bigger brush and very quickly brush in the last of this gray. In this section, and I have one more section to go to, which is the dress on the other side of the tree. All right, our last section of dress to fill in, and then we can do any accent colors we want on this. I've definitely found that I like doing this more in the evenings than earlier in the day, and I don't know why. Maybe it's just I have too much energy earlier on and I can't sit and focus quite as well as I do if I do these kinds of things in the evening. So I'm just filling in this whole section again on this side, and then I will take a bigger brush to it and fill in the rest. And then I might take a few accent colors because I am realizing I really do like the look of a little bit of mud streaked on this dress. And I would like to see a little bit of that brought back into the image. Okay, now we can get a much bigger brush and just fill all of this in with a couple of layered streaks. All right, take a look at this. And now I have to make a decision. I'm going to go ahead and zoom out and look at how the whole outfit is coming together with those shoes. Because I'm wondering if I want to change the color of those shoes. I don't know. I'm kind of actually liking the brown aspect of them and how it relates to the hair color. And it might be a little bit too matchy-matchy if I go with gray on them. So I actually think I will sample the color down there and then monotone the shoes in that color. And then I will come back to the dress and add a few accents. So I'm actually going to go ahead and sample, I think, right there. I must make my brush much smaller because these shoes are have very fine details. Hello. Okay, so the whole front figure is now done, but I still have to color in the base colors of some of the other foreground elements, including the logs, the ground, and the trees, which is pretty much going to be brown. And then I'm actually going to go ahead and add some of those moss aspects back in later. So I'm going to go ahead and pick a rusty red because I believe these are cedar trees, and I really like that rusty red color they have. I don't want too bright though. We are trying to keep with a relatively muted palette on this one, aren't we? Let's see how this does. If it's too much, then I can always backtrack. I'm also going to go ahead and turn off the background lines for a moment, just so I know where not to draw. Thank you. Oh, also, am I on the right layer? Yes, I am. I think I will stick, let's see, I think I will stick with the brighter colored wood. It'll be a little bit standout. We'll see. Might change my mind here in a second once I get a little bit more on there. I think I will stick with it. And I'm going to go ahead and zoom in a bit just so I can get a little bit closer on the details and make sure I am staying in the lines. We'll be adding a lot of moss and foliage textures back into this image later. So we're just trying to get the bare bones in there right now. One went a little outside the lines. We'll expand the brush size again, because luckily I made these tree lines very thick, so it's easy to stay in them. Oops. a little too far outside the lines. One great thing about this technique is if you have a photo that does not have the best lighting aspects, or you wish you could have changed the composition a little bit, this is a great way of dealing with it. I have definitely delved into some photo shoots that we were not as happy with, but gotten some pretty fun drawing results out of them. And we are also finally getting some color in those extended areas of the image. We kind of had to do some fudging. This branch right here is probably mostly going to be going back to moss color eventually, but we'll just get our underlayer going. All right, so now I'm going to go ahead and tone the color down just a touch for this underlog. Since it's dead wood, I don't want it to be quite as vibrant as our other one. And we'll make that brush a lot bigger for the moment. first section done. I'm going to go ahead and make the brush smaller for a second to get around some details. A few times. We're just creating the underlayer colors right now, so again, a lot of this moss is going to be coming back. It's one of the fun things about the Pacific Northwest. I've heard some people who've moved out here or come and visited say, wow, the forests are so green. And growing up here, I never really knew what they meant by that, because I just figured, you know, forests are green, right? And then they would talk about how in other places, you know, forests don't have green all over the limbs and stuff like that. And that was just so hard for me to imagine for a long time as a kid, until I traveled and went elsewhere and realized that, yeah, this is a pretty unique area in the world. Oh yes, I have to remember to put mud back on the dress, don't I? Just a little bit. I have to get the brush pretty small so that I can get into some of these sharper corners. Yeah, nature around here is pretty excellent. I don't know where some of you are in the world, if you live in this area or if you live in other areas. I'm sure every area has its excellent, excellent, interesting side of nature. I even remember being impressed. I've heard a lot of people say bad things about Nebraska, but I thought it was really crazy how flat that place was. It was kind of neat. All right, so we've got the main log drawn in there. So now I just have to pick maybe even a more muted color, I think, for the forest floor. I'll go with that. And brush some of that in before we do some more detail work on forest floor later. That's pretty muted, so I might actually add just a touch more toning in there. Again, I will be adding some other colors to it later, so it will pop back up a little bit. Okay, so I do believe all of the foreground elements are now drawn in, and we're going to go ahead and move on to the background elements. So what I can now do is pop those back into existence and go ahead and start filling in what is not filled in. So first thing I'm probably going to do is do some of the branches back there, which means I'm going to have to zoom in again. And I'm going to have to make the brush a lot smaller. Now I just have to hunt out all of the branches that need a little bit of color added, and I'm on the wrong layer. I don't know if you guys noticed that. So I actually need to switch and make sure I'm on this layer down here, number 7, which is underneath the background element details. Make the brush even smaller. Just focus on honing those details into those crevices quickly. And a lot of these elements back here can probably just stay sticks, just with the black form that they are. But I want to go ahead and fill in what I can. And what I'm actually going to end up doing probably is filling in some of the background color and then moving even further back with the layers so that I can have several layers behind all of these branches. And that will make it a lot easier to fill in leaves and foliage and make it look realistic. Is anyone else working on art tonight? All right, now I'm going to go ahead and extend my brush size. Oh, that is too big. Just because we have some larger pieces here to fill in. Also going to go ahead and start filling in some of these background branches and downed trees. And again, moss will be coming back afterwards. I'm going to go ahead and zoom out for a second. I got all of those up there, so I'm just going to go ahead and fill in bits of tree. All right, I'm going to go for a bit of a darker color now. A bit more gray, I think, for some of these stumps back here. that, I'm going to go ahead and add some more lighter tree colors in. Start filling in some of these larger downed stumps. All right, so now I'm going to go ahead and get a warmer color, kind of like what we were using for the cedar earlier. I'm going to fill in a few branches with this warmer color. So we have some of that cohesively in the background. Okay, I think I've done enough of the background elements that I actually want to add a new layer to the background. And on this layer, I'm going to actually just start to fluffily fill in as much of the leftover colors as possible before getting to the detail work. So I'm going to go ahead and start by adding a more neutral color. Maybe just a touch warmer. And we're going to make that our background forest floor color. So I'm on a new layer, and I'm just going to fill this area in very quickly. And I might need to wait here a second. It takes my brush a little while to get across the entire page because this is such a large file. It's taken its time. I can see it moving. I bet you guys can too. All right, do another one. This forest is looking a lot browner than it probably will in the end. I'm just going to apply a little more on this side. Of course, I have a brush size that is so large I might actually need to switch tool types. 1 second. Oh, it might actually still be processing the color on the image. So we'll just have to give it a moment. Sometimes when you work with images this large and you use a larger sized brush, it just takes a minute for it to get across the entire thing. But I have had this issue with some of the brushes where they are so large that when I try and click on something, it's actually really difficult. So I might try and get around that one moment. So yep, I think we're going to have to just wait here a second. The brush is still processing color, it looks like. So, yeah. If anybody has any questions, this is a great time for it. Let me know what you guys are up to tonight, what you are having fun with. We are waiting for color to process, so it just might take a few more moments. So I might be having a freeze up on my computer with the color still processing. So I may end this tonight and finish this drawing up, and I will be displaying it on Instagram at Harmony Sage Lawrence, which I think you might be able to find through the Temperate Sage Instagram as well. But that is, oh, hold on. Oh my gosh, guys, I don't have to end it. It fixed itself. Yay! Okay, that got really close. I was like this close to deciding that it had frozen. Luckily, it did not. Sometimes it just takes the color a really long time to process, and I didn't want to have to hang you guys on the line there for a while. But yes, I will be displaying the finished image at Harmony Sage Lawrence at Instagram. All right, so for the background color, I have to go ahead and decide on a green tone that will be the general background tone. Let's see. Go ahead and start with this. I'm just going to go ahead and double check that I am on the right layers. I am. Good. Oh, 1 second. We have something selected that we do not need selected. All right, there we go. Got it fixed, I think. All right, so I need to get my green color back. And I'm going to go ahead and just start smudging this in. I'm going to go a little bit slower this time so that we don't have a brush freeze up like we had last time. We'll just take it a bit slower on this. All right, I'll just fill in those sides in particular a little bit more. And I'll wait for my brush to catch up again. Okay, so I think we've got a pretty good base layer of colors now. And from this we can start working on the details. Yay! So now I just have to determine which layer of details I'm going to start with. Perhaps it actually might be not a bad idea to start in the background and then work my way forward. So one really nice thing about brushes is you can get brushes that actually already come with certain kinds of textures, like leaves. So I might actually go ahead and start with some of that for just the background foliage textures. Now, if you want a very, very distinct style of foliage in the background, you might have to spend a little bit more time on it. But I'm going to go ahead and show you how amazing some of these brushes people have created are. So we've got concept brushes from the Adobe Creative Cloud collections. You can actually get brushes that are already collections of leaves that will actually sway as you move your brush around. These are a little bit too big for my need. So I'm going to go ahead and get that, and we'll just find an accent color to put into the background with these leaves. Maybe I'll start with something darker actually, and then I'll work way to brighter colors. So I can go ahead and just plop this down here and just start kind of splatting it in. And it will already start to kind of create the texture of foliage in the background. This is the amazing thing about digital art. There are just so many incredible resources out there to help get the look you're going for quickly. So I just have to determine how thick and in which areas I want these to show up. I'm going to actually go for an even darker color now. I'm going to hit it a little harder on these corners. And that kind of splats it in a little bit better. I'm even going to go for even darker color now. Now I'm going to go for a lighter color, something to kind of accent these darker sections we have. There we go. That's kind of getting the mood I'm looking for the very far back background sections. Maybe I'll just do just something that's a little sunnier right in these sections. Kind of gives the feeling of being kind of encompassed by forest, especially when you do the darker colors on the outer edges, and then the lighter colors towards the center. Kind of feels like that tunnel effect of foliage. All right, I'm thinking that's pretty good for the foliage in that furthest back section. The next things that I need to consider in the farther back sections of this image is the ground right here, which I might want to add at least a bit of green to. But I'm going to actually start with a watercolor brush and then maybe move my way into using some of the other foliage brushes to kind of fill the area out. Now again, you can actually go in and do all the detailed textured drawings of foliage, but I'm just trying to show you some of the cool tools that are already out there to kind of help quickly give that expression. So I'm going to go back to the watercolor tool collection I have. I'm going to look for something just kind of gives me the vibe of moss. maybe this right here. I go ahead and make that a lot larger. And we'll just give it a try. I'm gonna find a better moss color for our foreground. There. And I'm actually gonna go ahead and I guess start with this in the background layers. So you can kind of add it to the floor area we have been working on. I don't have to worry too much about actually getting right up against the dress anymore since I created all these different layers. I might also add another texture or color texture into this. Maybe I'll go for something a little brighter, yellowy. All right, that's looking pretty decent to me. I might also go ahead and move to the next layer forward and go ahead and decorate some of that with moss as well. Oops, can't quite go over that branch. It looks a little funky. I'll have to go behind it. If I wanted to go crazy on this, I could have made all sorts of layers to make this easier on myself. All right, now I'm going to go ahead and zoom in and get some moss lines on these branches by making these a bit smaller, and go back to a slightly more yellow tint. Gotta keep it varied. And something I will probably also do is create some layers above the actual lines at some point, and then I will do some very specific moss that goes over the tops of these dark lines I've created throughout the image. And that will really start to hone the effect. Sorry about that. Let's see. There's definitely moss on these trees back here. All right, I'm going to go ahead and zoom out again. And I'm going to move forward to the even further forward layers. In fact, these are the front layers, and just expand the size of my brush a bit. And start drawing moss onto these trees. At least our first layers of moss. And I need to make sure I add some back into this log. Go. That's starting to feel more like the Pacific Northwest forest. All right, I am also going to go ahead and move a whole step forward, and this is where I get to start applying some moss over the tops of everything, including the lines. So if I want to kind of soften lines in certain areas, I can now using the moss. Just adding that layer over everything. Soften the edges of these trees a little. Maybe bring this down in size just a little bit. And I'll still do a bit of color correcting at the very end of this, so I may decide to change the tone of the image color-wise quite a bit. But at least we can get all these little elements in place first. All right, so now I might go ahead and add just a sprinkling of actual foliage textures in. I've picked up several foliage texture packs that I really enjoy, like this one. So with these foliage textures, I can actually bring in like a full-sized texture of foliage. And this is something I really want to do in the future with you guys, is show you how to actually make these brushes so that you can go out in your neighborhood or around your house and take pictures of foliage and then turn them into brushes that you can use whenever you want in Photoshop. I'm going to use a few of these, maybe down the size a bit, and get some decent green textures for the background, and then just use these to kind of spruce throughout and add a little extra texture. Oops. That might be pretty subtle. What it's doing is just adding a little bit of leaf texture in there. Go ahead and increase the flow all the way though. Peek through these, find the ones I'm looking for. Here we go. This is a good one for on logs. Go ahead and go for a much brighter color. If I want, I can go ahead and switch the direction of the brush to kind of swap it up a bit. And that helps quite a bit with the background flooring. I'm going to go ahead and make a darker version of that. Just kind of texture that in with the brighter colors we got, so it's not too bright. Maybe even go for a much darker version of it. There we go. So I'm going to go ahead and switch up my layers now so that I am in the foreground zone and do some similar work. Lay a little bit of that across the ground. Mix it in with some different directions and color brightnesses. That can kind of help enhance the moss textures in the background as well. All right, I'm actually getting to a point where I am pretty happy with the overall textures going on in this image. One other thing I like to play with though a lot is adding just kind of some ambient textures. And one of my favorite types is speckling, which I'm going to find really quickly if I can. All right, here we go. So generally with this, I'm going to go ahead and make a whole new layer up here at the top. I'm going to go ahead and change this layer by clicking on it to, not that type of blend mode, to overlay, because I want these colors to kind of blend in with the image and not feel so opaque over the top of it. And I'm trying to think about a color that would be kind of fun to have in here, or even just a tone. I'm kind of thinking something kind of orangey and yellow. And then what I'll just do is I'll figure out which layer section I'm in, and I'll kind of add a bit of this to several different layers. So I'm going to the very background layer. I'm just going to do a splash of this across. Oh, did we show anything at all? Give me a second here. Not sure if this is showing up. Give me one moment to figure out what's going on. Oh, let's get that to normal. There we go. Okay, I was on the wrong kind of mode. So yeah, you can like add spots like this into an image to just quickly enhance the action and textures of the background and foreground. I'm going to go ahead and make the opacity of mine lower though. And just bring a little bit of that in there. Maybe even go for brighter color. There we go. And then I'm going to bring it forward a layer. And let's see, let's go for this one. Bring a sprinkling of it through there as well. And then I'm going to go all the way to the front where we had that overlay layer. And just kind of bring it in even across the model potentially, though I'm not quite sure I'm liking that. And just kind of create shapes with it that'll bring a little extra action into the textures of it. So happy with that. There is one more lighting related color thing I want to do, which is another overlay mode. I'm actually going to go ahead and switch back to the normal Photoshop brushes. So go back to general brushes, get a soft round brush. This is actually a decent size right here. Go ahead and overlay it 100% and then I'll change the opacity after I do this. I'm going to go ahead and pick something kind of, I'm going to try this reddish orange. Bring it down across the model like this. And then I'm going to go ahead and change the opacity in the layers down quite a bit. I might also add another one on top of this, do the same thing with it. Go to overlay and maybe pick a slightly different color, or maybe I'll go for like maybe a brighter yellow and do another one. Stick to the centers here. And then we'll go ahead and change the opacity of this as well. So we're just starting to kind of create a little more atmosphere with the lighting in this image. I'm going to do one more with overlay. And in this one, I think I'm going to go for something a lot more contrasty. Give it a red. Just see what happens. There we go. I'm starting to like how those colors are kind of playing here. That's feeling pretty good to me. So the last thing I do with these images is I affect the colors until I'm happy with how everything's playing out. So we're going to go down to here in the layers and we're going to make some color change layers. I'm going to go ahead and do color balance, which should show up at the very top there and open up. And then I'm just going to go ahead and slide colors around between these different modes. I'm going to actually start with shadows on this. And just to kind of adjust the shadows until I'm kind of happy with how they're playing with the colors in the image. Like this brings a little bit more natural tones into the image by kind of shifting the greens down a bit. Midtones. Happy with those. And we can use the highlights to kind of bring a bit more brightness to the image. Quite a bit more. Go back to shadows. Okay, I'm happy with that. One last thing I might play with could be selective color. And we have a lot of yellows and greens going on in this image, so I can play with those quite a bit. I can either make them more intense, or I can bring them back a bit, kind of go for a more muted tone. We have reds that we added with the last layer. And greens, which actually aren't playing quite as much. It's actually surprising how much of yellow rules greens in color shifting. I'm pretty happy with this. This is where I'm going to go ahead and leave this image. So let's see, when did I start? I think I started around 6. So this was a 3.5 hour-ish process to get to this image. But to be honest, it's not bad considering you're making essentially a painting. You're just speeding up the process, actually, surprisingly, by using a photo as a starting image for your painting. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. If you stuck around for it, I hope you guys have fun with this if you ever get to try it. And I will probably be doing this again maybe next weekend. We will see. If not next weekend, maybe the weekend after. All right, it has been a lot of fun hanging out with you guys and doing this. I hope to see you guys next time.